Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Humiliated in first class, a minute later she destroys their $15 billion empire. Flight 927 from New York to London was speeding at 900 km per hour, and in the luxurious first-class cabin, champagne sparkled in crystal flutes. The passengers were a mix of billionaires and celebrities, all dressed in impeccable suits and glittering gowns. At the center of this opulence, Isabella Montclair, a black woman in her 40s, walked gracefully, wearing an elegant but understated suit, her eyes sparkling with intelligence. Yet, as soon as she placed her handbag on the seat next to her, the air changed. Harold Kensington, an arrogant real estate tycoon and owner of the charter flight, looked at her contemptuously. "Ma'am, this seat is reserved for someone like me," he sneered, his eyes narrowed with barely concealed hatred. Isabella calmly replied, "I am in the right seat. Your documents confirm my reservation." Harold couldn't believe his eyes. He'd never seen a black woman dare stand up to him. With a cruel smile, he made a dramatic gesture and ordered the attendants to find him a more suitable seat. The other passengers, shocked, watched in silence. Isabella felt a cold anger rise within her, but not once did her face betray humiliation. She knew something Harold didn't. In a minute, everything he had built could collapse. She sat down, closed her laptop, and with a slight smile, began typing a few lines on her keyboard. At that moment, no one on board suspected that this simple action would trigger a financial tsunami. Bank accounts, investments, shell companies, all the levers of Harold's $15 billion empire were at her fingertips. A minute later, notifications began pouring into the assistants' phones: cancelled transactions, terminated contracts, broken partnerships. Panic spread faster than champagne spilled on the carpet. Harold, flushed with anger and disbelief, finally realized what he had underestimated. Isabella Montclair, humiliated only a minute earlier, had just shown him that she was not only capable of defending herself, she could destroy everything he thought was untouchable. And in the icy silence of first class, only the beeps of notifications echoed, announcing the imminent fall of the $15 billion empire. Flight 927 had barely taken off, and the atmosphere in the first-class cabin was already tense. Isabella Montclair, elegant and calm, walked down the aisle to her reserved seat. Her gaze swept over the wealthy passengers, some engrossed in their phones, others talking in hushed tones. Everything seemed normal until Harold Kensington laid eyes on her. Harold, a man in his 50s with a tailored suit and an oversized ego, frowned. "This seat is reserved for people like me," he said, his voice betraying a mixture of condescension and arrogance. Isabella stopped, stared at Harold with implacable calm, and replied, "According to my reservation documents, this seat is indeed mine." The passengers around him turned, some intrigued, others amused. Harold could not accept the idea that a black woman, seemingly ordinary in his eyes, would dare to challenge his authority. He signaled to his assistants, giving them theatrical orders: "Move her immediately. She has no business being here." Isabella smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly. Her heart didn't beat faster, but her mind raced. She knew exactly what she was doing and why this man would soon regret his arrogance. She sat down, placed her laptop on the folding table, and, without a word, began to work. Her fingers danced across the keyboard with pinpoint precision. In a matter of seconds, she activated the script she had been preparing for months: account checks, strategic investment notifications, and financial triggers programmed for that precise moment. Outside, the plane was speeding toward London, but inside, the real chaos had just begun. Harold didn't know it yet, but every second that passed brought the collapse of his $15 billion empire closer. A beep sounded on Harold's phone. He raised an eyebrow in puzzlement. Then a second. And a third. His assistants exchanged confused glances, their faces paling as the notifications poured in. Isabella looked up, staring at him with that same icy calm. "Just a minute," Harold thought, unable to tear his gaze away from the screen that had just revealed the first wave of his fall. The notifications kept coming. Every ding on Harold Kensington's phone raised the tension to an almost unbearable level. Key contracts he thought were untouchable were being cancelled, share transfers frozen, and several strategic partners had just withdrawn their trust. His entire $15 billion empire was silently reeling before his eyes. "What the?" Harold muttered incredulously. His panicked assistants tried to understand the source of the disaster, but nothing seemed logical. Isabella, however, remained perfectly still in her seat, observing the scene with cold mastery. She knew exactly what each of her actions triggered. The weeks of preparation, the careful study of Harold's financial vulnerabilities, all of it was culminating now. And no one in that gilded cabin suspected the power she had just unleashed. "Ma'am, there seems to be a problem with your accounts," an assistant stammered, trying to protect Harold. Isabella slowly looked up at him, her expression calm but stern. "These aren't my accounts. They're yours. Everything you've built with arrogance and greed is vulnerable." Harold felt anger and fear mix in an explosive cocktail. His trembling voice rose, "It's impossible. No one can do that, in a minute." And yet, that was exactly what had just happened. The assistant's screens now displayed massive casualties, cancelled contracts, and red alert warnings. Every division of Harold's empire was experiencing an invisible but devastating earthquake. The passengers, once fascinated by the luxury of first class, now watched the scene with curiosity mixed with disbelief. Some whispered among themselves, she just ruined an entire empire, just by typing on a computer." Harold stood up, red with anger, almost shoving the other passengers. "Stop this now," he shouted, but his assistants could do nothing. Every action they tried to take to save the situation was immediately thwarted. Isabella had planned for every scenario, every possible reaction. In a corner of the cabin, Isabella closed her laptop, placed her hands on her knees, and turned slightly toward Harold. Her words were calm, but heavy with meaning. "You humiliated me. You thought I didn't belong here. You forgot one simple rule: never underestimate someone who knows your weaknesses better than you do." Harold, distraught, didn't know where to turn. In less than 2 minutes, the $15 billion empire he thought was unbreakable was crumbling before him, and nothing and no one could stop it. As the plane continued its flight over the Atlantic, Isabella Montclair still hadn't moved. She watched Harold Kensington, who was frantically scanning his assistant's screens, sweat beading on his forehead. Panic had now replaced his usual arrogance. Isabella took a deep breath and opened her laptop again. This time, she wasn't just acting on Harold's visible finances. She was activating the second phase of her plan, public disclosure. With a single click, confidential documents were sent to the financial media, investors, and regulators. Questionable transactions, hidden fraud, shell companies, and market manipulation were exposed. Compromising emails and evidence of corruption that Harold had carefully hidden for years were now circulating on every possible platform. In the cabin, the assistant's phone screens displayed crisis alerts. Reuters, Empire Kensington involved in a fraude massive. Bloomberg, investors are withdrawing their funds from all Harold Kensington companies. Wall Street Journal, authorities are investigating the misdeeds of Harold Kensington. Harold was livid. He had spent his life building an invincible empire, and now, in a matter of minutes, everything was crumbling around him. The passengers whispered, some discreetly taking out their phones to check the information. Isabella, still calm, looked Harold straight in the eyes and said, "You thought you could humiliate someone like me and remain untouchable. You were arrogant, blinded by your own power. Now everyone sees who you really are." Harold tried to protest, to deny it, but no one listened. The financial media and social media had already broadcast the revelations. Every notification on his phone was a hammer blow to his empire. Meanwhile, Isabella closed her computer, smiled slightly, and leaned forward to adjust her chair. She hadn't even raised her voice, yet her actions had triggered a financial cataclysm. She had just proven that a single person, prepared and determined, could destroy a $15 billion empire in an instant. And as the plane continued its flight to London, Harold finally understood that the initial humiliation was nothing compared to the cold, methodical vengeance that had just been unleashed against him. As alerts and notifications continue to flood Harold's phones, Isabella Montclair doesn't stop there. She knows that to completely destroy his empire, it's not enough to attack Harold alone, she must also weaken his allies and partners. With almost frightening calm, Isabella activates the third phase of her plan. She sends strategic information to key investors and the boards of directors of Kensington's partner companies. Each document reveals the questionable financial relationships, illegal transactions, and market manipulation orchestrated by Harold and his collaborators. A few minutes later, the effects are immediate. Investors are massively withdrawing their funds. Strategic partners cancel joint projects. Banks impose account freezes and restrictions on all transactions of the Kensington Empire. Harold, furious, rushes to Isabella. "What have you done? Stop it, it's illegal." Isabella, impassive, looks him straight in the eyes. "You've spent years humiliating and exploiting others. You think your money and power can protect you? Look around you. You're alone now." Harold's assistants move in panic, trying to calm the situation, but it's useless. The cabin is now a silent theater of defeat, an empire that seemed invincible is crumbling, and the passengers, witnessing this unique scene, begin to understand the magnitude of what is happening. Harold, flushed with anger and humiliation, realizes that his network of allies, on whom he blindly relied, has abandoned him. Every partnership, every contract, every financial support has been withdrawn in record time. Isabella hasn't just inflicted public humiliation on him, she's made those around him betray him out of fear, caution, or awareness of the truth. She leans in slightly, her tone soft but forceful. "You built an empire on lies and arrogance. Today, it falls because you forgot one essential thing: underestimating someone with courage and knowledge is always fatal." At that precise moment, Harold understands that this is no longer a simple humiliation in flight, it is the end of everything he believed to be untouchable. His fall is inevitable. As the plane flies over the Atlantic, Isabella Montclair makes a strategic decision: it's time to strike where it will hurt most, world public opinion. She opens her laptop again and activates a secure broadcast network she has been preparing for weeks. Compromising documents concerning Harold Kensington and his empire are now being sent simultaneously to the main international financial media, Reuters, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, major TV news channels, influential social networks and financial forums, tax and regulatory authorities in several countries. The information is explosive: fraud, stock market manipulation, bribery, and shell companies. Everything Harold thought was hidden is now exposed. Notifications pile up on the phones of the assistants and Harold himself. Each sound is another blow to the already faltering empire. Emails from investors pour in, all wanting to immediately disassociate themselves from Harold and his companies. The media publishes non-stop articles detailing the wrongdoing, and social media is ablaze, transforming the affair into a global scandal. Harold is in shock. He stands up, screams, and tries to control the situation, but everything is beyond his control. His arrogance and power, which he believed to be absolute, are now reduced to nothing. The first-class passengers, helpless witnesses, watch the tycoon lose his footing before their eyes. Isabella sits calmly, observing the scene with cold satisfaction. She knows that social and financial justice is not just about laws or regulations, it lies in the control of information and truth. She leans slightly towards Harold and says, with icy calm, "You thought your money and threats would protect you. You were wrong. The truth always comes out, and those who exploit others for their own gain must pay the price." At that precise moment, the $15 billion empire Harold had arrogantly built begins to publicly crumble. Investors withdraw funds, partners break contracts, and the world discovers long-kept secrets. What began as a private, first-class humiliation turns into a global defeat. Harold finally understands the extent of his fall. It's no longer just a matter of money, but of reputation, power, and credibility. Everything is crumbling around him. And Isabella Montclair, with icy precision, is solely responsible for this destruction. After unleashing financial and media chaos, Isabella Montclair isn't resting. She knows that for Harold Kensington's fall to be complete and irreversible, she must strike on all fronts. Sitting in her chair, she opens a sophisticated dashboard containing all the information on Harold's empire, subsidiaries, bank accounts, past transactions, strategic partners, and even the stock market movements of his main competitors. Each piece of data becomes a lever she can pull at will. She begins by isolating Harold from his allies. The last remaining loyal partners are confronted with irrefutable evidence of malfeasance and corruption. The boards of directors of his partner companies call emergency meetings and vote for massive withdrawals of funds. The banks close his credit lines and block all his transactions, plunging the empire into total paralysis. Meanwhile, Isabella ensures that Harold's fall is irreversible in the media. She releases documents and videos detailing his fraudulent practices, highlighting the extent of his manipulations. The media seizes on the case, and social media becomes the scene of a global scandal. Hashtags like #KensingtonExpose and #JusticeForAll spread quickly, and Harold's once invincible image is now associated with deceit and arrogance. Harold desperately tries to fight back, hiring lawyers and communications teams to limit the damage. But Isabella has already anticipated his counterattacks. Every action he takes is immediately countered, every lie or attempt at manipulation revealed to the public in real time. Sitting calmly, Isabella lets a faint smile cross her face. Everything is going exactly as planned. She knows that revenge isn't just about financial destruction, it's the recognition of her strength, intelligence, and relentless justice that makes all the difference. And as the plane continues its flight to London, Harold, humiliated and powerless, begins to understand the extent of his defeat. His wealth, his power, and his network are now nothing more than illusions. Isabella has transformed her revenge into a lesson in strategy and justice, relentless and definitive. Isabella Montclair knew that to seal Harold Kensington's downfall, she had to strike where he could no longer defend himself, the legal and financial authorities. As the plane approached London, she prepared the final act of her revenge. She simultaneously sent international regulators, tax agencies, and financial investigation agencies a comprehensive set of evidence: suspicious transactions, shell companies, illegal transfers, and Harold's compromising emails. Everything was documented, authenticated, and irrefutable. Minutes later, the first notifications arrived. Regulators had opened emergency investigations, banks were permanently freezing Harold's accounts, and several courts were announcing investigations into fraud and corruption. The empire he had built in arrogance and silence was now legally and financially paralyzed. Harold, red with rage and panic, shouted, "It's impossible. No one can do that." Isabella calmly replied, "You believed your arrogance made you invincible. You humiliated, exploited, and deceived. Today, you face the consequences of your actions alone." The first-class passengers watched, fascinated by the spectacle. Some discreetly filmed, knowing they were witnessing a display of extraordinary power and intelligence. Others whispered, "She just destroyed an empire in less than 10 minutes, just with her knowledge and strategy." Harold tried to defend himself, calling his contacts and lawyers, but everything was already orchestrated. Every lever he thought he controlled had been anticipated by Isabella. His wealth, his partners, and his reputation were now irreversibly affected. Isabella leaned slightly towards him, her voice cold and assured. "You thought that putting me down would make you stronger. But true strength isn't in money or power. It's in mastery, preparation, and justice. Your empire is crumbling because you ignored these simple rules." As the plane landed in London, Harold finally realized he had lost everything he had spent his entire life building. Isabella stepped off the plane with the same grace and calm that had characterized her every move, leaving behind a humiliated man and a shattered empire. After the fall of Harold Kensington and his empire, Isabella Montclair stepped off the plane to the stunned gaze of passengers and journalists at the airport. Every step she took exuded confidence and poise. She wasn't just a woman who had avenged a humiliation, she was now a symbol of power and strategic intelligence. The media were waiting for her, eager to hear what she had to say. Isabella smiled, placing a delicate hand on her handbag, and said calmly and precisely, "What just happened is a reminder, no one is above justice or truth. Arrogance and corruption always end up being revealed." Fascinated journalists feverishly took notes. Social media instantly filled with hashtags in her name, celebrating her mastery and determination. She had just turned a humiliation into a historic victory, and everyone knew it. Isabella wasn't content to remain in the shadows. She used her newfound influence to support honest businesses and protect those who were victims of Harold's practices. She became a consultant to regulators, a mentor to entrepreneurs, and a role model for those who had been marginalized or undervalued. In the quiet luxury of her life, Isabella reflected on the power of strategy and patience. She had waited for the perfect moment to strike, using intelligence and mastery rather than brute force or impulsiveness. Her revenge was complete, but it had also sown the seeds of a new order, based on integrity and justice. Harold, for his part, was now invisible to the financial world. His accounts were frozen, his partners had abandoned him, and the reputation he had built on arrogance had crumbled. He had learned, too late, that underestimating someone like Isabella could cost far more than a first-class seat, it could destroy an entire empire. And as Isabella walked to her car in the London sunshine, she knew this victory wasn't just for her, it was for everyone the world had tried to crush. Her rebirth also sent a clear message: patience, intelligence, and determination can topple even the most powerful. Within weeks of Harold Kensington's public humiliation and fall, Isabella Montclair was no longer simply known as the woman who had destroyed a $15 billion empire. She had become a figure of global power and influence. International media praised her for her strategic intelligence and mastery of critical situations. Conferences and interviews proliferated, and young entrepreneurs saw her as a model of perseverance and vision. Isabella quickly realized she could turn her personal victory into a lasting impact. She launched a global initiative to promote transparency in business and encourage ethical business practices. Through her newly consolidated network, she established programs to support bright but marginalized young women and men, giving them access to resources and mentors they never imagined they would encounter. Meanwhile, Harold, now isolated and under investigation in several countries, watched his empire completely disintegrate. His financial partners, having been alerted by Isabella, refused any further collaboration. Every attempt at reconquest or manipulation ended in humiliating failure. Isabella had not only destroyed his power, but had ensured that it could never recover. In her London office, Isabella gazed out over the city. She smiled as she thought back to that minute in first class that had started it all. A single minute had been enough to change the course of a life, an empire, and even a system. She had transformed humiliation into power, and power into a global movement. She knew she now had a responsibility, to use her position to inspire, protect, and guide. But one thing was clear: anyone who tried to humiliate her or underestimate her strength would learn the same lesson Harold Kensington had: sometimes, a minute can turn everything around. Months had passed since the plane crash that had started it all. Harold Kensington was now just another name associated with a spectacular fall and financial scandals. His $15 billion empire had been destroyed, his reputation tarnished forever. Isabella Montclair, for her part, had transformed this personal victory into a lasting legacy. She founded an international foundation, supporting education, ethical entrepreneurship, and financial justice. Conferences were held around the world, where she shared her vision: intelligence, preparation, and integrity could overthrow even the most powerful systems. She still received letters of gratitude from people she had helped, young entrepreneurs, victims of financial manipulation, and even former colleagues who had been betrayed by Harold. Each message reinforced her conviction that true power lies in right, thoughtful action, not in money or arrogance. One evening, as she watched the lights of London twinkle from her study, Isabella thought back to that minute in first class that had changed her life and the lives of so many others. She smiled with satisfaction, knowing that that moment of calm and determination had been enough to topple an empire and send a clear message to the world. Underestimating someone who is prepared and determined can cost much more than a siege or $1 billion. It can cost an entire empire. And so, Isabella Montclair was no longer just a woman who had avenged a humiliation. She had become a global symbol of power, strategy, and justice. Her name resonated in people's minds as that of a woman who had proven, through action and intelligence, that arrogance and injustice had no place in the face of determination and mastery. The minute that started it all paved the way for a legacy that would last far longer than any money or power Harold Kensington had ever believed he possessed.